in Buddhism, change is emphasized. First, to unsettle people who think that they can achieve permanence by hanging on to life. And it seems that the preacher is wagging his finger at them and saying, like the Scotch preacher one day saying to Sunday congregation, preaching on the text, vanity of vanities, all is vanity. And what about the rich food you put into your mouths? 'Tis vanity. And the fine raiment you put on your backs? 'Tis vanity. And all your playing around, going to golf instead of coming to the church or the Sabbath? 'Tis vanity. And you'll be spending all your lives devoted to vanity. And the last day will come, the day of your death, and because you've devoted your life to vanity, you'll go down to the burning, fiery, brimstone pits of hell. And there you'll look up and say unto the Lord, oh Lord, I didn't know it. Oh Lord, I wouldn't have devoted my life to vanity if I'd known it. Oh Lord. And the Lord, he'll look down, and he'll say unto you, out of his infinite mercy, well, you know it now. So all the preachers together, you should say, don't cling to this thing. So then, as a result of that, and now I'm going to speak in strictly Buddhist terms, the follower of the way of Buddha seeks deliverance from attachment to the world of change. He seeks nirvana, the state beyond change, which the Buddha called the unborn, the unoriginated, the uncreated, and the unformed. But then you see, what he finds out is that in seeking a state beyond change, seeking nirvana as something away from samsara, which is the name for the wheel, he is still seeking something permanent. And so there are, as Buddhism went on, they thought about this a great deal. And this very point was the point of division between the two great schools of Buddhism, which in the south were Theravada, the doctrine of the Thera, the elders, sometimes known disrespectfully as the Hinayana. Yana means a vehicle, a conveyance, a diligence, or a ferry boat. This is a yana. And I live on a ferry boat because that's my job. Then there is the other school of Buddhism called the Mahayana. Maha means great. Hina, little. The great vehicle and the little vehicle. Now, what is this? The Mahayanists say, your little vehicle just gets a few people who are very, very tough ascetics and takes them across the other shore to nirvana. But the great vehicle shows people that nirvana is not different from ordinary life. So that when you have reached nirvana, if you think, now I have attained it, now I have succeeded, now I have caught the secret of the universe, and I am at peace, you have only a false peace. You have become a stone Buddha. You have a new illusion of the changeless. So it is said that such a person is a pratyeka Buddha. That means private Buddha. I've got it all for myself. And in contrast with this kind of pratyeka Buddha, who gains nirvana and stays there, the Mahayanists use the word bodhisattva. Sattva means essential principle, bodhi, awakening. A person whose essential being is awakened. The word used to mean junior Buddha, someone on the way to becoming a Buddha. But in the course of time, it came to mean someone who had attained Buddhahood, who had reached nirvana, but who returns into everyday life to deliver all other beings. This is the popular idea of a bodhisattva, a savior. And so, in the popular Buddhism of Tibet and China and Japan, people worship the bodhisattvas, the great bodhisattvas, as saviors. Say the hermaphroditic Kuan Yin. People love Kuan Yin because she, he, could be a Buddha, but has come back into the world to save all beings. The Japanese call he, she, Kannon. And they have in Kyoto an image of Kannon with 1,000 arms, radiating like a great aureole all round this great golden figure. And these 1,000 arms are 1,000 different ways of rescuing beings from ignorance. Kannon is a funny thing. I remember one night when I suddenly realized that Kannon was incarnate in the whole city of Kyoto. That this whole city was Kannon. That the police department, the taxi drivers, the fire department, the mayor and corporation, the shopkeepers, insofar as this whole city was a collaborative effort to sustain human life. However bumbling, however inefficient, however corrupt, it was still a manifestation of Kannon, with its 1,000 arms, all working independently, and yet one. So they revere those bodhisattvas as the saviors who've come back into the world to deliver all beings. But there is a more esoteric interpretation of this. The bodhisattva returns into the world. That means he has discovered that you don't have to go anywhere to find nirvana. Nirvana is where you are, provided you don't object to it. Change, and everything is changed, nothing can be held on to. To the degree that you go with a stream, you see, you are still. You're flowing with it. But to the degree you resist the stream, then you notice that the current is rushing past you and fighting with you. So swim with it. Go with it. And you're there. You're at rest. And this is, of course, particularly true when it comes to those moments when life really seems to be going to take us away. And the stream of change is going to swallow us completely. The moment of death. And we think, oh, this is it. This is the end. And so at death we withdraw. Say, no, not that. Not yet, please. But actually, the whole problem is that there really is no other problem for human beings than to go over that waterfall when it comes. Just as you go over any other waterfall. Just as you go on from day to day. Just as you go to sleep at night. Be absolutely willing to die. Now, I'm not preaching. I'm not saying you ought to be willing to die, and that you should muscle up your courage and somehow put on a good front when the terrible thing comes. That's not the idea at all. The point is that you can only die well if you understand this system of waves. If you understand that your disappearance as the form in which you think you are you, your disappearance as this particular organism, is simply seasonal, that you are just as much the dark space beyond death as you are the light interval called life. These are just two sides of you, because you is the total wave. See, you can't have half a wave. Nobody ever saw waves which just had crests, no troughs. So you can't have half a human being who is born but doesn't die. Half a thing. That would be only half a thing. But the propagation of vibrations, and life is vibration, it simply goes on, but its cycles are long cycles and short cycles. Space, you see, is not just nothing. If I could magnify my hand to an enormous degree so that you could see all the molecules in it, I don't know how far apart they would be, but it seems to me they would be something like tennis balls in a very, very large space. And you'd look, when I move my hand like this, and say, for God's sake, look at all those tennis balls. They're all going together. Crazy. And there are no strings tying them together. Isn't that queer? No, but there's space going with them. And space is a function of, or it's an inseparable aspect of, whatever solids are in the space. That is the clue, probably, to what we mean by gravity. We don't know yet. So in the same way, when those marvelous sandpipers come around here, the little ones, while they're in the air flying, they have one mind. They move all together. When they alight on the mud, they become individuals and they go pecking around for worms or something. But one click of the fingers and all those things are going zip into the air. They don't seem to have a leader because they don't follow when they turn. They all turn together and go off in another direction. Amazing. But they're like the molecules in my hand. So then you see, here's the principle. When you don't resist change, I mean over-resist. I don't mean being flabby. When you don't resist change, you see that the changing world, which disappears like smoke, is no different from the Nirvana world. Nirvana, as I said, means breathe out. Let go of the breath. So in the same way, don't resist change. It's all the same principle. So the Bodhisattva saves all beings, not by preaching sermons to them, but by showing them that they are delivered, they are liberated, by the very fact of not being able to stop changing. You can't hang on to yourself. You don't have to try not to hang on to yourself. It can't be done, and that is salvation. Memento mori, be mindful of death. Gurdjieff says in one of his books that the most important thing for anyone to realize is that you and every person you see will soon be dead. See, it sounds so gloomy to us because we have devised a culture fundamentally resisting death. I love the story of a conversation at an English country house at a dinner party where the hostess started up the question of death and asked the various guests what they thought was going to happen to them when they die. And some thought about reincarnation, and others thought about various kinds of different planes of being, and others thought they were going to be annihilated. But none of the guests had answered except Sir Roderick, who was a kind of a military type, but a very devout pillar of the Church of England. He was the church warden, chief of the vestry in the local country parish. And the lady said, "Sir Roderick, you haven't said a word. What do you think is going to happen to you when you die?" "Oh," he said, "I am perfectly certain that I shall go to heaven and enjoy everlasting bliss, but I wish you wouldn't indulge in such a depressing conversation." That's true, isn't it? Death in the Western world is a real problem. We hush it up. We pretend it hasn't happened. Our morticians, who are very smart commercial operators, know exactly what's expected of them. And they make death just awful by pretending it doesn't happen. See what happens. You go to a hospital and you're at the end. You've got terminal cancer. And all your friends come around and they wear false smiles and they say, "Cheer up, you'll be all right. In a few days from now, you'll be back home and we'll go out for a picnic again." The doctors have their bedside man. You see, a doctor is absolutely helpless with a terminal case because a doctor is, by social definition, a healer. And he's not allowed to help you die. He's out of role. Even though, he may sneak behind the rules and do it, but he's got to heal you. So he's going to keep you indefinitely on the end of tubes and all kinds of things. While there's a certain grave demeanor to all this, and all the nurses are so pleasant and so totally distant because they know this is death. And they mayn't be frank with you. That's why they feel distant. It's not that they're not concerned. It's not that they're heartless people. But that they just don't know how to be frank, like lots of people when they meet a drunk. They don't know what to do with a drunk. Because he's not behaving right. So when you're dying, you're not behaving right. You're supposed to live. See, so we don't know what to do with a dying person. We don't get around that person and say, listen, man, I've got the news for you. You're going to die. And this is going to be great. Look, no more responsibilities. Don't have to pay those bills anymore. Don't have to worry about anything. You're going to just die. And let's go out with a bang. Let's have a party, see? We'll put some of that morphine in you so that you won't hurt too much. But we're going to prop you up in bed and we're going to bring all our friends around and we're going to have champagne. And you're going to die at the end of it, see? And it's going to be just marvelous. It's like being born, see? When we had birth problems, see, all women used to think that birth had to be painful. It was good for them. It was one of the things you had to suffer because you'd been screwing around with people, and therefore you had to have a child, and it's got to hurt. And then the doctors got together and they scratched their heads, and the man called Grantley Dick Reed said, "No, birth doesn't hurt. It's natural. All we've got to do is to talk these women into the idea that it doesn't hurt, that all these so-called pains are just tensions, and that birth is great. It's not a disease. It's not really something you ought to go to hospital for, because you associate hospitals with diseases. and sickness. Birth isn't sickness. All right, now let's do some new thinking. What about death? Is death sickness? Or is it a healthy, natural event like being born? Of course it is. So, I mean, a little change in social attitude about this will fortify everybody else. I mean, if I'm alone and all my relatives are going, pretending to me, it's going to be hard for me. I've got to challenge the whole bunch of them and get my dander up and say, listen, damn you, I don't want all this thing around here. You've got to take a different attitude about my death. Well, that's hard. But if everybody helps me, and we do, we're all one body, if they all come around and say, congratulations, you're going to die. Liberation now, you see. Because just before you die, I mean, look, I know very well a skillful priest handling a person dying can do this for them. But he has to talk very, very, very straight. And he has to say, listen, these doctors, don't you pay any attention to them. They're trying to amuse you and deceive you. You're going to die. This isn't terrible. But it's just going to be the end of you as a system of memories. And so you've got a great chance right now, before it happens, to let go of everything. Because you know it's going to go, and it is going to help you. It's going to help you let go of everything. So if you have any possessions left, give them away. Give everything away. And if you have anything to say that is you felt that you ought to say before you die, and that you're kind of hanging on to and it's bothering you, say it. I mean, I don't mean necessarily a last confession, but say it said that Adlai Stevenson, shortly before he died, said that he had been making a monkey of himself because he didn't agree with the government's policy about something or other. You know, he had to get that off his chest because he had a little thought in the back of his mind that things were catching up with him. You see? So the moment comes when this thing called death has to be taken completely. Not as some ghastly accident. Something that all the friends are going to stay away because you're awful. I mean, sometimes people, when they die, are in a very unpleasant physical condition. They don't smell good, they don't look good, and so on. But an enormous amount can be done with scientific methods to make things reasonably tidy from a purely sensory point of view. But the main thing is the attitude. That death is as positive as birth and should be a matter for rejoicing, because death is the symbol of the liberation. There is a wonderful saying that Ananda Kumaraswamy used to quote. I pray that death will not come and find me still unannihilate. In other words, that man dies happy if there is no one to die. In other words, if the ego has disappeared before death caught up with it. But you see, the knowledge of death helps the ego to disappear because it tells you you can't hang on. So what we need, if we're going to have a good religion around, that's one of the places where it can start. Having, I don't know, well, nowadays I suppose they'd call it the Institution for Creative Dying. But something like that. And you can have one department where you can have champagne cocktail party to die with, another department where you can have glorious religious rituals and priests and things like that, another department where you can have psychedelic drugs, another department where you can have special kinds of music, anything, you know. All these arrangements will be provided for in a hospital for delightful dying. But that's the thing, to go out with a bang instead of a whimper. I was talking a great deal yesterday afternoon about the Buddhist attitude to change, to death, to the transience of the world, and was showing that preachers of all kinds stir people up in the beginning by alarming them about change. That's like somebody, actually raising an alarm, just in the same way as if I want to pay you a visit, I ring the doorbell. And then we can come in and I don't need to raise an alarm anymore. So in the same way, it sounds terrible, you see, that everything is going to die and pass away, and here you are, thinking that happiness, sanity, and security consist in clinging on to things which can't be clung to, and in any case there isn't anybody to cling to them. And the whole thing is a weaving of smoke. So, that's the initial standpoint. But, as soon as you really discover this, and you stop clinging to change, then everything is quite different. It becomes amazing. And not only do all your senses become more wide awake, not only do you feel almost that you're walking on air, but you see, finally, that there is no duality, no difference between the ordinary world and the Nirvana world. They're the same world, but what makes the difference is the point of view. And of course, if you keep identifying yourself with some sort of stable entity that sits and watches the world go by, you don't acknowledge your union, your inseparability from everything else that there is. You go by with all the rest of the things, but if you insist on trying to take a permanent stand, on trying to be a permanent witness of the flux, then it grates against you, and you feel very uncomfortable. But it is a fundamental feeling in most of us that we are such witnesses. We feel that behind the stream of our thoughts, of our feelings and our experiences, there is something which is the thinker, the feeler, and the experiencer. Not recognizing that that is itself a thought, feeling, or experience, and it belongs within and not outside the changing panorama of experience. It's what you call a cue signal. In other words, when you telephone and your telephone conversation is being tape recorded, it's the law that there shall be a beep every so many seconds. And that beep cues you in to the fact that this conversation is recorded. So in a very similar way, in our everyday experience, there's a beep, which tells us this is a continuous experience, which is mine. Beep. In the same way, for example, it is a cue signal when a composer arranges some music and he keeps in it a recurrent theme, but he makes many variations on it. Or more subtle still, he keeps within it a consistent style. So you know that it's Mozart all the way along, because it sounds like Mozart. But there isn't, as it were, a constant noise going all the way through to tell you it's continuous, although in Hindu music they do have something called the drone. There is behind all the drums and every kind of singing something that goes, and it always sounds the note which is the tonic of the scale being used. But in Hindu music, that drone represents the eternal self, the Brahman, behind all the changing forms of nature. But that's only a symbol. And to find out what is eternal, You can't make an image of it, you can't hold on to it. And so it's psychologically more conducive to liberation to remember that the thinker or the feeler or the experiencer and the experiences are all together. They're all one. But if out of anxiety you try to stabilize, keep permanent the separate observer, you are in for conflict. Of course, the separate observer, the thinker of the thoughts, is an abstraction which we create out of memory. We think of the self, the ego, rather, as a repository of memories, a kind of safety deposit box or record or filing cabinet place where all our experiences are stored. Now, that's not a very good idea. It's more that memory is a dynamic system, not a storage system. It's a repetition of rhythms. And these rhythms are all part and parcel of the ongoing flow of present experience. In other words, first of all, how do you distinguish between something known now and a memory? Actually, you don't know anything at all until you remember it. Because if something happens that is purely instantaneous, if a light flashes, or to be more accurate, if there is a flash lasting only 1/1,000,000th of a second, you probably wouldn't really experience it, because it wouldn't give you enough time to remember it. We say in customary speech, well, it has to make an impression. So in a way, all present knowledge is memory, because you look at something and for a while the rods and cones in your retina respond to that, and they do their stuff, jiggle, jiggle, jiggle. It's all vibration. And so as you look at things, they set up a series of echoes in your brain. And these echoes keep reverberating, because the brain is very complicated. First of all, everything you know is remembered, but there is a way in which we distinguish between seeing somebody here now and the memory of having seen somebody else who is not here now, but whom you did see in the past, and you know perfectly well when you remember that other person's face, it's not an experience of the person being here. How is this? Because memory signals have a different cue attached to them than present time signals. They come on a different kind of vibration. Sometimes, however, the wiring gets mixed up and present experiences come to us with a memory cue attached to them. And then we have what is called a déjà vu experience. We are quite sure we've experienced this thing before. But the problem is that we don't see, don't ordinarily recognize, is that although memory is a series of signals with a special kind of cue attached to them so that we don't confuse them with present experience, they are actually all part of the same thing as present experience. They are all part of this constantly flowing life process, and there is no separate witness standing aside from the process, watching it go by. You're all involved in it. Now, accepting that, you see, going with that, although at first it sounds like the knell of doom, is if you don't clutch it anymore. Splendid. That's why I said that death should be an occasion for a great celebration. That people should say, happy death to you. And always surround death with joyous rites, because this is the opportunity for the greatest of all experiences, when you can finally let go because you know there's nothing else to do. There was a kamikaze pilot who escaped because his plane that he was flying at an American aircraft carrier went wrong. And he landed in the water instead of hitting the plane. So he survived. But he said afterwards that he had the most extraordinary state of exaltation. It wasn't a kind of patriotic ecstasy, but the very thought that in a moment he would cease to exist, he would just be gone, for some mysterious reason that he couldn't understand, made him feel absolutely like a god. Well then, in Buddhist philosophy, this a sort of annihilation of oneself, this acceptance of change, is the doctrine of the world as the void. This doctrine did not emerge very clearly, very prominently in Buddhism, until quite a while after Gautama the Buddha had lived. We begin to find this, though, becoming prominent about the year 100 BC. And by 200 AD, it had reached its peak. And it was developed by the Mahayana Buddhists. And it is the doctrine of a whole class of literature which goes by this complex name, Prajna Paramita. Now, Prajna means wisdom. Paramita, for crossing over, for going beyond. There is a small Prajna Paramita Sutra, a big Prajna Paramita Sutra, and then there's a little short summary of the whole thing called the Hridaya, or Heart Sutra. And that is recited by Buddhists all over Northern Asia, Tibet, China, and Japan. And it contains the saying, that which is void is precisely the world of form, that which is form is precisely the void. Form is emptiness, emptiness is form, so on. And it elaborates on this theme. It's very short, but it's always chanted at important Buddhist ceremonies. And so it is supposed by scholars of all kinds who have a missionary background that the Buddhists are nihilists, that they teach that the world is really nothing, there isn't anything, and that there seems to be something is purely an illusion. But of course this philosophy is much more subtle than that. The main person who was responsible for developing and maturing this philosophy was Nagarjuna. And he lived about 200 AD. One of the most astonishing minds that the human race has ever produced. And the name of Nagarjuna's school of thought is Madhyamika, which means really the doctrine of the middle way. But it's sometimes also called the doctrine of emptiness, or Shunyavada, from the basic word shunya, or sometimes shunya has ta added on the end, and that ta means ness, emptiness. Well then, emptiness means essentially transience. That's the first thing it means. Nothing to grasp, nothing permanent, nothing to hold on to. But it means this with special reference to ideas of reality, ideas of God, ideas of the self the Brahman, anything you like. What it means is that reality escapes all concepts. If you say there is a God, that's a concept. If you say there is no God, that's a concept. And Nagarjuna is saying that always your concepts will prove to be attempts to catch water in a sieve or wrap it up in a parcel. So he invented a method of teaching Buddhism which was an extension of the dialectic method that the Buddha himself first used, and this became the great way of studying, especially at the University of Nalanda, which has been re-established in modern times, but of course it was destroyed by the Muslims when they invaded India. The University of Nalanda, where the dialectic method of enlightenment was taught. The dialectic method is perfectly simple. It can be done with an individual student and a teacher, or with a group of students and a teacher. And you would be amazed how effective it is when it involves precious little more than discussion. Some of you, no doubt, have attended tea groups, blab labs, in which people are there and they don't know quite why they're there, and there's some sort of a so-called resource person to disturb them. And after a while, they get the most incredible emotions, and somebody tries to dominate the discussion of the group, say, and then the group kind of goes into the question of why he's trying to dominate it, and so on and so forth. Well, these were the original blab labs. And they have been repeated in modern times with the most startling effects. That is to say, the teacher gradually elicits from his participant students what are their basic premises of life. What is your metaphysic? In the sense, I'm not using metaphysic in a kind of a spiritual sense, but what are your basic assumptions? What real ideas do you operate on as to what is right and what is wrong, what is the good life and what is not? What arguments are you going to argue strongest? Where do you take your stand? The teacher soon finds this out for each individual concerned, and then he demolishes it. He absolutely takes away that person's compass. And so they start getting very frightened and say to the teacher, all right, I see now, of course I can't depend on this, but what should I depend on? And unfortunately, the teacher doesn't offer any alternative suggestions, but simply goes on to examine the question, why do you think you have to have something to depend on? Now, this is kept up over quite a period, and the only thing that keeps the students from going insane is the presence of a teacher who seems to be perfectly happy, but is not proposing any ideas. He's only demolishing them. So we get finally, not quite finally, to the void, the shunya. And what then? When you get to the void, there is an enormous and unbelievable sense of relief. That's nirvana. Phew, as I gave a proper English translation of nirvana. Ah, great. So they are liberated, and yet they can't quite say why or what it is that they found out. So they call it the void. But Nagarjuna went on to say, you mustn't cling to the void. You have to void the void. And so the void of non-void is the great state, as it were, of Nagarjuna's Buddhism. But you must remember that all that has been voided, all that has been denied, are those concepts in which one has hitherto attempted to pin down what is real. In Zen Buddhist texts they say, you cannot nail a peg into the sky. And so, to be a man of the sky, a man of the void, is also called a man not depending on anything. And when you're not hung on anything, you are the only thing that isn't hung on anything, which is the universe. Which doesn't hang, you see. Where would it hang? It has no place to fall on, even though it may be dropping. There will never be the crash of it landing on concrete floor somewhere. But the reason for that is that it won't crash below because it doesn't hang above. And so there is a poem in Chinese which speaks of such a person as having above not a tile to cover the head, below not an inch of ground on which to stand. And you see, this which to people like us who are accustomed to rich imageries of the divine, the loving Father in heaven who has laid down the eternal laws, O Word of God incarnate, O wisdom from above, O truth unchanged, unchanging, O light of life and love, the wisdom which from the hallowed page, a lantern for our footsteps, shines out from age to age. See, so that's very nice. We feel we know where we are, and that it's all been written down, and that in heaven the Lord God is resplendent with glory, with all the colors of the rainbow, with all the saints and angels around and everything like that. So we feel that it is positive, that we've got a real rip-roaring, gutsy religion full of color and so on. But it doesn't work that way. Roaring, gutsy religion full of color and so on. But it doesn't work that way. The more clear your image of God, the less powerful it is, because you're clinging to it. The more it's an idol. But voiding it completely isn't going to turn it into what you think of as void. What would you think of as void? Being lost in a fog, so that it's white all around and you can't see in any direction. Being in the darkness. Or the color of your head as perceived by your eyes. That's probably the best illustration that we would think of as the void. Because it isn't black and it isn't white, it isn't anything. But that's still not the void. Take the lesson from the head. How does your head look to your eyes? Well, I tell you, it looks like what you see out in front of you. Because all that you see out in front of you is how you feel inside your head. So it's the same with this. And so, for this reason, the great sixth patriarch, Huineng, in China, said that it was a great mistake for those who were practicing Buddhist meditation to try to make their minds empty. And a lot of people tried to do that. They sat down and tried to have no thoughts whatever in their minds. And not only no thoughts, but no sense experiences. So they'd close their eyes, they'd plug up their ears, and generally go in for sensory deprivation. Well, sensory deprivation, if you know how to handle it, can be quite interesting. it'll have the same sort of results as taking LSD or something like that. And there are special labs made nowadays where you can be sensorily deprived to an amazing degree. But if you're a sort of a good yogi, this doesn't bother you at all, send some people crazy. But if you dig this world, you can have a marvelous time in a sensory deprivation scene. Also, especially if they get you into a condition of weightlessness. Skin divers going down below a certain number of feet, I don't know exactly how far it is, but get a sense of weightlessness. And at the same time, this deprives them of every sense of responsibility. They become alarmingly happy. And they have been known to simply take off their masks and offer them to a fish. And of course they then drown. So if you skin dive, and you have to keep your eye on the time. You have to have a water watch or a friend who's got a string attached to you. If you go down that far, and at a certain specific time you know you have got to get back. However happy you feel, and however much inclined to say, survival, what the hell's the point of that? And this is happening to the men who go out into space. They will increasingly find that they have to have automatic controls to bring them back. Quite aside that they can't change in any way from the spaceship. Now, isn't that interesting? Can you become weightless here? I said a little while ago that the person who really accepts transience begins to feel weightless. When Suzuki was asked, what is it like to have experienced Satori, enlightenment, he said, it's just like ordinary everyday experience, but about 2 inches off the ground. Zhuangzi, the Taoist, said, it is easy enough to stand still. The difficulty is to walk without touching the ground. Why do you feel so heavy? It isn't just a matter of gravitation and weight. It is that you feel that you are carrying your body around. So there is a koan in Zen Buddhism. Who is it that carries this corpse around? And so when you feel, common speech expresses this all the time. Life is a drag. I feel I'm just dragging myself around. My body is a burden to me. To whom? To whom? That's the question. You see? And when there is nobody left for whom the body can be a burden, the body isn't a burden. But so long as you fight it, it is. So then, when there is nobody left to resist the thing that we call change, which is simply another word for life, and when we dispel the illusion that we think our thoughts, instead of being just a stream of thoughts, and that we feel our feelings instead of being just feelings, it's like saying, to feel the feelings is a redundant expression. It's like saying, actually, I hear sounds, for there are no sounds which are not heard. Hearing is sound. Seeing is sight. You don't see sights. Sightseeing is a ridiculous word. You could just say either sighting or seeing, one or the other, but sightseeing is nonsense. So we keep doubling our words, and this doubling is comparable to oscillation in an electrical system where there's too much feedback, where you remember in the old-fashioned telephone, where the receiver was separate from the mouthpiece, the transmitter. If you wanted to annoy someone who was abusing you on the telephone, you could make them listen to themselves by putting the receiver to the mouthpiece. But it actually didn't have that effect. It set up oscillation. It started to howl. It could be very, very hard on the ears. The same way, if you turn a television camera at the monitor, that is to say, the television set in the studio, the whole thing will start to jiggle. The visual picture will be of oscillation, like that. And the same thing happens here. When you get to think that you think your thoughts, the you standing aside the thoughts has the same sort of consequence as seeing double. And then you think, can I observe the thinker thinking the thoughts? Or, I am worried, and I ought not to worry, but because I can't stop worrying, I'm worried because I worry. And you see where that could lead to. It leads to exactly the same situation that happens in the telephone, and that is what we call anxiety, trembling. But this discipline that we're talking about of Nagarjuna's abolishes anxiety, because you discover that no amount of anxiety makes any difference to anything that's going to happen. In other words, from the first standpoint, the worst is going to happen. You're all going to die. And don't just put it off in the back of your mind and say, I'll consider that later. It's the most important thing to consider now, because it enables you, it is the mercy of nature, because it's going to enable you to let go and not defend yourself all the time, waste all energies in self-defense. So, this doctrine of the void is really the basis of the whole Mahayana movement in Buddhism. It's marvelous. The void, of course, is in Buddhist imagery symbolized by a mirror, because a mirror has no color and yet reflects all colors. When this man I talked to you of, Huineng, said that you shouldn't just try to cultivate a blank mind, what he said was this: the void, shunyata, is like space. Now, space contains everything. The mountains, the oceans, the stars, the good people and the bad people, the plants, the animals, everything. Now, the mind in us, the true mind, is like that. You will find that when Buddhists use the word mind, they have several words for mind, but I'm not going into the technicality at the moment. They mean space. See, space is your mind. It's very difficult for us to see that because we think we're in space and look out at it. There are various kinds of space. There's visual space, distance. There is audible space, silence. There is temporal space, as we say, between times. There is musical space, so-called distance between intervals, or the intervals between tones, rather. It's quite a different kind of space than temporal or visual space. There's tangible space. But all these spaces, you see, are the mind. They are the dimensions of consciousness. And so, this great space, which every one of us apprehends from a slightly different point of view, in which the universe moves, this is the mind. So it's represented by a mirror, because although the mirror has no color, it is for that reason able to receive all the different colors. Meister Eckhart said, in order to see color, my eye has to be free from color. So in the same way, in order not only to see, but also to hear, to think, to feel, you have to have an empty head. And the reason why you are not aware of your brain cells, unless you're only aware of your brain cells if you get a tumor or something in the brain, when it gets sick. But in the ordinary way, you're totally unconscious of your brain cells. They're void. And for that reason, you see everything else. So that's the central principle of the Mahayana. And it works in such a way, you see, that it releases people from the notion that Buddhism is clinging to the void. This was very important when Buddhism went into China. The Chinese really dug this, because Chinese are a very practical people. And when they found these Hindu Buddhist monks trying to empty their minds and to sit perfectly still and not to engage in any family activities, they were celibates. Chinese thought they were crazy. Why do that? And so the Chinese reformed Buddhism. And they allowed Buddhist priests to marry. And in fact, what they especially enjoyed was a sutra that came from India, in which a layman, who was a wealthy merchant called Vimalakirti, out-argued all the other disciples of Buddha. And of course, you know, if in these are these dialectic arguments that are very, very intense things. If you win the argument, everybody else has to be your disciple. So Vimalakirti, the layman, won the debate, even with Manjusri, who is the bodhisattva of supreme wisdom. They all had to see a contest to define the void. And all of them gave their definitions. Finally, Manjusri gave his. And Vimalakirti was asked then for his definition, and he said nothing. And so he won the whole argument. The thunderous silence.
We will, I think, continue this kind of neurotic behavior until it either is our undoing or until we awaken to archaic values. And that's why the weekend is called what it is. And the archaic revival is a very large cultural wave that, you know, can be pushed. You could trace the beginnings of it, the first swell, back to the turn of the century with relativity and theosophy and surrealism, the work of Freud and Jung on the unconscious. But it's a discovery, a moving toward a realization that the values that can serve us are archaic values, that we have to go completely outside of history. And we have to make, we are going to find out the nature of human nature. We can't have it several ways. We can't live in obfuscation. I mean, the real question is man good? You know, because we're going to find out. Because as we move more and more into this cultural domain that I call the imagination, nothing lies between us and the expression of our dreams, you know. And so far, our dreams have been, I think, expressed fairly shoddily. I mean, you know, our cities are like sores. Our contribution to the ecosystem of the planet is plutonium, pesticides, chlorofluorocarbons, so forth and so on. An apologist for the human race would say but we had so many strikes against us. The law of gravity, the cost of materials, the resistance of water, air, and so forth and so on. Well, fine, then we're going to get rid of all that. We're going to enter into the imagination where, the tensile strength of a structure is whatever you say it is. This is where language comes in. I think language is the sort of the CAD/CAM, the computer-assisted drawing software for creating the reality of the imagination. I think it's overwhelming, our situation, the potential and the depth of the strikes against us. I mean, it's really, what's going on this planet is absolutely unique so far as we know. It's never happened before on this planet. Intelligence emerging out of biological organization and actually having a shot at what? Who knows? I mean, being itself is some kind of opportunity. The reasonable expectation is that nothing exists. Well, why should anything exist? I mean, it seems to me the most conservative universe would be a dimensionless plenum, a homogeneous, pointless, dimensionless. That makes sense. Why then is there instead, multiplicity upon multiplicity? I mean, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, stuff like that. How in the world do you get from utter emptiness to that kind of thing? The richness, the creative force behind it all is awesome. And I'm not religious in any ordinary sense. And in fact, I'm violently anti-religious in most senses. I mean, I'm certainly would lead the charge against priestcraft in any form. But the picture of the universe as a machine subject to a few laws discovered by a bunch of guys in powdered wigs, that's ridiculous. I mean, you've got to be kidding. Science doesn't deal, as it's always at pains to point out, with what's called subjective experience. Well, that's really too bad, because that's all any of us ever have is subjective experience. So we have, in the interests of, I don't know what exactly, a curious drive, an obsession of the Greeks, really, an obsession with the physical world that we have not been able to disentangle ourselves with, so that, we can measure the temperature of distant stars, but we don't know what we think about the woman we're living with. Stuff like that. Just such a completely overgrown and overdeveloped dichotomous situation that it makes no sense. So, in terms of any kind of conclusion or something like that, it's that there is an experience. It's harmless, meaning it can't kill you. That's the guarantee there. There is this experience. It is in our cultural heritage. It synergizes the most profound and private dimensions of our being. It allows us to recast ourselves in new forms quickly. And if we don't turn back toward this style of relating to ourselves, to each other, and to the world, but persist instead in the addiction to syntactical abstraction, then I think we'll just run it off the edge. And it will be a tragedy, because it is a horse race. Don't let anybody kid you. It's not that the good guys are miles and miles behind, and so you just might as well tear your ticket up and throw it in the air and go home. No, it's an absolute horse race. Neck and neck, photo finish, race between education and disaster. I mean, we're going to either burst out into a millennium of freedom and caring and decency, or we're going to toxify the whole thing and just turn it into an ash heap. And the responsibility falls largely on us And we don't know. I mean, the momentum, the lethal momentum of these institutions is terrifying. Our position is like that of people who are attempting to turn a battleship 180 degrees, and we're doing it with an oar, you know? I mean, the momentum of it is incredible. But it is not a closed system. And I say this as a reasonable person. I mean, I want to keep stressing that I won't sit at the same table with the channelers and the people who have good news about Atlantis and all of this stuff. I mean, if this is your private thing, it's okay, but the rules of evidence preclude it being taken seriously until you get your act more together. But in the psychedelic experience, there is confounding paranormal material. It's the only place I've ever found it. I scoured India. These guys, as far as I can tell, it's a skin game. But outlandish things are going on inside the psychedelic experience. It seems to imply the thing we had hardly dared hope, which is that the world is whatever you say it is if you know how to say it right. And then the whole task becomes, how do we take control of this language that allows us to say it right? I think I speak for most people here, serve the idea that matter is ultimately at the command of mind. But we need to move that forward as a demonstrable principle, because without that, the fear of most people is that we're imprisoned by physics in a sinking submarine. And yet when you go into these psychedelic spaces, what you discover is that all bets are off, that we can't even tell how weird it is. I mean, it may be possible to walk to Arcturus if you have the right set of coordinates. And the whole concern is to get the word out, to spread this meme, to empower people to confirm the existence of these realities for themselves, and to begin to form a kind of community consensus about it. You know, it's only, I guess in 1992, we will celebrate the 500th anniversary of the discovery of the New World. 500 years ago, people discovered the other half of this planet. And we're living there now. This is the New World. 500 years ago, this didn't exist. What existed was a vast cataract patrolled by sea monsters. And the oceans of the world poured off this cataract into the infinite abyss. And that was the edge of the world. We, the psychedelic people, are like these early explorers coming back and saying, you know, I sailed west for 16 days and I didn't go mad. Instead, this is what happened. And I bring news of this, this, and this. And what we're accumulating are like the diaries of explorers. But there's a world there. It's a mental world, yes. But we are mental creatures. Take note of that. If we could go there, we would go there. And the thing is, we don't know that we can't go there. We have never taken the imagination seriously. We have never taken the self-management of culture seriously. We've always sort of thought things should just go along like a random walk. But now, because of the immense technical power that's come into our hands, the design process of the whole planet is now on our desk. And we're being asked to essentially step into stewardship of the entire planetary environment. We have to have then a vision. We have to have a dream, not a vision or a dream, the vision, the dream. And it can't come from the personality of individual human beings. It has to come out of the bones of the planet. Yeah. And this is, I think, what the psychedelic experience is broadcasting. It's broadcasting the hologrammatic, fractal, altogether, all at once image of totality that our religions have sensed and called God, that the shaman have learned to use as a vast kind of computer for extracting information and for generating healing energy. But it is that there is some kind of controlling, minded, integrated thing behind nature. And we're not going to understand that this weekend, next week, or ever. This is not a relationship of solving a problem. It's a relationship of being an initiate of a mystery and then living your life, in the light of that. And the task of understanding is endless, because understanding is simply the integrated coordination of pattern. And nature is pattern upon pattern, upon pattern, upon pattern, upon level. It has no depth. Its measure cannot be taken. Everything is infinite, and everything is animate, and everything is filled with a kind of deep concern for humanity. I mean, we are the lame little brother because we seem to be cut off from all the rest of this. Well, that's kind of a Blakean take on it.
The shamanistic cultures themselves have a notion of a fall, and that and this may just be the people that we happen to interview in our era where we're actually studying it, but that the old days of shamanism were the good days, and what we have now is diluted. And is that just a matter of cultural contact with other cultures, and that the original shamanistic cultures were isolated, or is indeed there a different quality to the time of this 20,000 years ago that led to a general fall amongst our species of,
It's a very complicated question. The answer gets pretty technical, or talking about it gets pretty technical. The thing that's so interesting about psilocybin and DMT is that they're so closely related to ordinary brain chemistry. The brain chemistry of all higher animals runs largely on serotonin. Serotonin is 5-hydroxytryptamine. DMT is NN-dimethyltryptamine. Psilocybin is 4-phosphoryloxy NN-dimethyltryptamine, but the 4-phosphoryloxy group goes off as it crosses the blood-brain barrier, so it's 4-hydroxy NN-dimethyltryptamine. So it's very interesting that these powerful, naturally occurring hallucinogens are in many cases only one molecule away from endogenous neurotransmitters. So in answer to your question, it's possible to suggest that we're as close as one mutation away from significant shifts in the chemical mix of the human brain. And for instance, in the pineal gland, there's an enzyme called adenosine, which is chemically 6-methoxy-tetrahydroharmalan. It's very closely related to the harmine alkaloids in ayahuasca. Well, the persistent myth about ayahuasca is that it creates states of group-mindedness and telepathy. The original alkaloid was actually named telepathine until it was discovered that it was structurally similar to harmine, which had been previously described by Hochstein and Paradis. So, in other words, what's going on here is the possibility that language, telepathy, and all of these mental abilities that are unique among human beings have to do with a very, very small number of mutations in the brain amine production pathways. One of the things that I want to talk about here is the possibility of new forms of communication, and that the psychedelics can stimulate new forms of communication among human beings, even in the way that they created language in the first place. In other words, I see language as a Model A version of something which could be made a lot more efficient and better and effective. You had something, and then or did you? You go ahead.
When humankind changes direction and then goes towards the altered state, so I'm an altered state, and that projection, what do you think that we will do with science and all of the stuff that we've created that is destroying us?
Well, science, there are different ways to practice science. The Greek style was, science was a spiritual undertaking. The purpose was to know, the idea being that somehow there was something good about knowing. I mean, I had a philosophy professor who said, first of all, I'll teach you how to recognize the truth. Secondly, I'll try to teach you what's so great about it. And this is that kind of a situation. Science, philosophers of science are perfectly aware of the limitations of science. It's the thousands and thousands of workbench scientists who think of themselves as servants of a world religion who create the problem. We need to know how matter works, and we need to know the things which science tells us, but it has no basis for extrapolating into human values. And the culprit there is the concept of social science. This is an obscene idea, and we should disabuse ourselves of it immediately. Social science, psychology, intellectual history, even linguistics, I would say, and philology, all of this stuff. These people should find honest work. And they're not scientists, and they're mucking up. I mean, it was a grand dream of science that it would extend its methods into social phenomena, having had such great success in the 19th century with Darwin and Wallace and biology. They thought, well, then Herbert Spencer and all these people, why not just extend it into society? But the problem is there are emergent properties in society that exceed the descriptive engines of science. There are emergent properties in biology. I mean, biology may also have to be left out of science. I mean, biology is classificatory, and it works very well there. But in terms of mechanism and understanding, it's pretty murky. DNA was decoded in 1950. The molecular geneticists promised a golden age shortly to follow, and it's 40 years later, and they still don't understand gene expression or what all this stuff is in the DNA. It's been very disappointing considering what was promised. I think science is an art. Everything is an art, because we have no sure knowledge of anything. I mean, maybe mathematics is not an art, because there, you work from artificially constructed premises. I'm very keen on science. I just don't like its philosophical pontifications. As a method, it's been very effective, but it's bred great pride in it, and it's thought that it could turn itself to domains where it was completely inappropriate.
I have more questions, but I want to try to limit things to that. Maybe if she wanted to. And I haven't tried mushrooms yet. I send away the kit and look around that. But a lot of the things that you've been explaining and describing, to me, have become a reality over the last year. Just the usage of hashish, just ingestion of it, on a very, I have to say, a very well, probably limited because I'm comparing my experience to the psilocybin descriptions that you give, and they sound, tremendous. I think the question I'm looking for is, before you, I guess, got involved with psilocybin and DMT and things like that, were you predisposed to saving the planet and being a humanistic type of person? And did the DMT and psilocybin did it take you to a more profound awareness of, what you as a human wanted to do?
Well, I've thought about all of this because it's weird to have the life I have. It's so strange. I mean, until I went into therapy, I thought I had the most ordinary family in the world. And then once you're in therapy, you discover, that no, it was the most insane scene you've ever heard of. And you just didn't notice. But, I've always been interested in nature, and I've always been interested in beauty. And I think it was the pursuit of beauty that served me best, because when I was a kid, first I started out collecting rocks, and then I collected butterflies. And then in my emergent phallic phase, I was an amateur rocketeer. And the major thrill there was setting off these explosive fuels and watching the possibility of shrapnel and all this stuff. And then as I got into rockets, I got into science fiction. And science fiction, I really consider a proto-psychedelic drug, because what science fiction does is it gives permission to imagine. It says, try it this way, this way, this way. And then you get, as a kid, you get the idea, that anything is possible. That's what science fiction teaches you. And then, and I was really obsessive about science, and I wanted to be an astronautical engineer, and Werner von Braun was my hero and all that. And then it sort of flipped at some point, and I got in, and I decided that I had been terribly narrow, and I was figuring all this out for myself. I was in some little town in Colorado, and I decided I'd been terribly narrow and that it was all in the humanities. And I began reading Henry James and all this stuff. And I was into Aldous Huxley as an example of an English novelist, and read Anti-Chrome Yellow, After Many a Summer Must Die of the Swan, and so forth and so on. And then came upon The Doors of Perception. And just, I was like 14 years old, and it was astonishing. And I said, if a tenth of this is true, then this is the most amazing thing there is. Well, if you've read The Doors of Perception, it's actually a terribly conservative gloss. I mean, it's all about looking at pictures and seeing the iskite in the folds of your trousers and thinking about how that relates to Meister Eckhart and all this Huxleyan type stuff. But that gave me the idea. And then I stuck with it. I stuck with it somehow and found marijuana, and that went on to LSD. And then my great good fortune, I think, is that just a few months after I took LSD, somebody brought me DMT. And DMT is a miracle. I mean, DMT is like something that fell out of a flying saucer. I mean, it is so strong and so psychedelic. I mean, I can't imagine being more smashed than that, or wanting to be. I mean, it's more like a near-death experience than any near-death experience I ever heard anybody describe. They sound absolutely pedestrian compared to a DMT trip where, you're sure you're dead. You say, what the hell else could it be? And then I went to Asia. I was at Berkeley when I had all these drug experiences. And then I went to Asia and tried to find it with yogas and all that, and ended up smoking a lot of hashish and becoming more cynical than ever about spirituality, and just saying, hashish and LSD. That was, before I went to the Amazon, that was what I discovered that really convinced me you could get somewhere, was, to take a bunch of LSD and then smoke great hash on top of that, and really crazy things do go on. And then I went to the Amazon, and, incredible shamanism is happening there. I mean, they don't hold back. The method I used in India was I would just say, what can you show me? I've read all these books. I know how to manipulate all this multisyllabic mumbo jumbo, but just one thing. I say, oh, no, very pushy. But then when you go to South America, then they just say, okay, let's go out in the forest, we'll get the stuff, we'll cook it up, and tonight we'll show you our best trick. And it slams you to the wall. I mean, you plead for mercy. And it was a vindication, because the thing I want to stress, and I don't know if it's as important to you as it is to me, but you do not have to sell out to any form of airheadism. You can be as tight-assed as you want. You can be as hard-nosed as you want. You can be as demanding, analytical, rational as you want. And the thing is bigger than you are. It'll just take you apart. It'll make you weep like a baby. So there's nothing about faith and sensitivity and reaching. And no. When it comes, it kicks in the front door and takes you prisoner. It's and that was what the flying saucer meant when it said, because you didn't believe in anything. This is the way to get somewhere. You'll never get anywhere if you believe in stuff, because, it'll take you 6 months to work through Babaji, and then you have to go on to somebody else, and life is just not long enough to give all these guys a crack at your enlightenment. So, you sort of have to goose it along. And the great vindication is then that when you behave like that, when you take that stance, which you would expect would betray you into nihilism, depression, and so forth, instead, no, that's works. That's the method. Then the gold, reject everything but gold. And you know what gold is? It looks like gold. It feels like gold. It's not something that you have to, I'm amazed at what thin soup is dished out as spiritual food. And it's because we are, as individuals, conflicted, I feel this in myself. I mean, it's hard to take psychedelics. It's not hard to sweep up around the ashram, but it's hard to take psychedelics.
I've read some stuff by Andrew Weil where he was talking about going in search of, the ayahuasquero, the curandero. And he talks a lot about these guys that are mixing up this sloppy brew and they're drunks and they're just, I don't even know if you could go down to the Amazon and find, I don't know what you could find. I haven't been there, but what his accounts were is there's a lot of just slop and drunk stuff happening. That a lot of these guys are alcoholics.
No, you're absolutely right.
And that's the main thing happening was the alcohol throughout and the Christianity's just kind of pervaded so much of this stuff that I wonder what's left and how you find it anymore.
Well, it really helps to do your homework. It really helps to go down there knowing as much as you possibly can about all this. Meaning,
apparently, so much of what we get out of it has to do with how it's made.
That's right.
How it's mixed.
That's right.
So on. And if you don't make it yourself and you don't know what's happening, then what have you got?
Because ayahuasca is a combinatory drug, it isn't like peyote or mushrooms or morning glories where you get the thing and eat it, and if you eat it in sufficient amounts, it works. This is something where two plants have been combined, and the proportions must be correct, and the method must be correct. So there's a huge room for personalities to come into it, for fast shuffles of all sorts, and mind games of all sorts to take place.
Guys, a lot of them are very egotistical too.
It's true. No, what you have to do if you're into ayahuasca, or what we did, was first of all, we drank a huge amount of swill, and we worked our way slowly through these people. And if somebody appeared to be an asshole, they were so classified and moved on. And eventually we got to good people. But what we did then was we got samples of their stuff, brought it back, put it through mass spectrophotometers and high-pressure liquid chromatography, saw what the proportions were, collected the live plants, moved them to Hawaii, grew the plants, reconcocted the thing, remass spec'd what we did, and made it as much like the good stuff as possible. So it was a project of 15 years and really maniacal dedication. But I have the faith, that if given sufficient time to work on ayahuasca, you could produce a drug out of there so good that it would be ludicrous to suggest that it was illegal. Because you see, this is brain soup. These are all neurotransmitters. There's not a non-endogenous neurotransmitter in the whole beverage. So really a non-endogenous neurotransmitter, meaning everything in this drug that you're about to drink is already in your head. There's nothing unusual where drugs like ketamine, mescaline, LSD, there's none of that in your body. It's like a slow-release DMT trip. It lasts 4 to 6 hours, and it's intensely visual. And unlike psilocybin, it doesn't have this outer space, science fiction, mega apocalyptarian kind of take on it, which is what psilocybin does. Psilocybin shows you the machines preparing to transport the faithful away from a burning earth. That's not what ayahuasca is about. It's about nature, water, flow, life, energy. It's almost, when MDMA was so hot and people called it an empathy drug and said it makes you empathetic with the people you're with, ayahuasca makes you empathetic with the people you're not with. And that's a much more profound experience because there's so much more of them, I don't
understand how you mean that empathetic with the people you're not with. I don't quite get it.
You feel the poignancy of the human situation. You feel, I'm usually in a hut somewhere surrounded by a bunch of Indians, and suddenly I understand what the songs are about. And they're always about the same thing. They're about the water and the people and the life and the fish and lost love, but you have this heart opening thing. Say, the folk, this is their mystery, this is their real. I'm getting it now. I'm feeling this huge wave of the wisdom of the folk, and they say this to you in Peru. They say, this is our university. You went to Harvard, we went to ayahuasca. Yeah.
I'm wondering if you can comment on ginseng weed, which I believe is the same thing as morning glory seeds.
No, it's different.
But I'm curious about ginseng weed because it grows wild all over. It's on the property. It's all down the highway. It's toxic also.
It's quite toxic. It's used shamanically in pre-contact California. The California Indians had what was called the Tolach religion, and they used Jimson weed seeds to initiate people at puberty, boys mostly. It's I'm kind of Pollyannish about drugs. I'm after a certain thing which these tryptamine hallucinogens do, and I tend to not pursue these other things too far. I didn't like Datura. It's very hard to have the degree of clarity that I think you should have on a drug. The tryptamine hallucinogens don't interfere with your clarity at all. You know who you are, where you are, what you're doing. I've seen people on Datura. I had an experience with someone on Datura where in the course of the conversation it came out that the guy thought we were in his apartment and I had actually encountered him in the marketplace. Well, that's a serious delusion. That's a serious problem. when I took Datura, all this was in Nepal years ago, I did have peculiar experiences. I mean, it is magical. It is delusory. Reality begins to come apart. These wraith-like, ghost-like creatures would come through my window, and I was waiting to get high, and then I would my attention would drift, and these things would come through my window, and they would let loose these sheets of newsprint that would flutter down over my lap, and I would fall forward reading these things that were, and as I read, amazement would grow in me and say, this is it, this is the answer, this is it. And then I would pull out and say, is it working? Is anything happening? And that went on, so there were several passes of that. And then it caused me to throw my leg up around my neck, and I got into this kind of thing. And I very carefully unfolded myself and lay back down. And then it happened again. And I thought to myself, I'm really glad I'm alone, because I think this would freak anybody out. And but it was definitely strange. I mean, the guy down the hall from me, I had taken it, he had taken it, and he had the impression in the night that this woman that he was scheming on came to him, and that they made love. And in the middle of the night, I got up to go to the John, and I had to cross through his room, and it was also my impression that she was in bed with him. Well, when we sorted it out the next morning, she'd been 30 miles away throughout the whole incident and had never been there. So it's interesting. There are a lot of altered states. Maybe that's a good point to make. There are all kinds of strange states of mind, and many plant-induced. From sorting through them, I've just become sort of fixated on these tryptamine things, because they seem to me somehow the most promising and the most real. The hallucinations of Jimson weed are curiously related in my mind. It's some kind of association schema. They're like seances and table tapping and Victorian women in shredded lace dresses, and that's about as far from a DMT hallucination as you can get. I mean, DMT hallucinations are 3, if not 4-dimensional, brightly colored, high-tech, organo-insectoid, so forth and so on.
You talked about the momentum is so strong, and then having to change it. And I think of all the people that are opposed to drugs, and they think every drug is the same and so forth like that. It just seems like an impossible task to be able to educate where these drugs would be available, and then people could take them and then they'd see the world in a healthier way. What do you have to say about a question like that?
Well, it's this struggle about human nature, defining human nature, Is it good to take certain drugs? Is it always bad to take drugs? Can you always tell a drug from a food, from a spice? What do these words really mean? All we can do is what we are doing, which is replicate the mean. Hold these workshops, try to build a core of consensus about what we're talking about. And this is itself quite elusive, you see, because what we're talking about is a mental event. Less focused than, let us say, orgasm. But even if you're talking about orgasm, here we use this word, but it must mean something different to everybody. Well, the problem is much worse with the psychedelic experience, because nobody wants to be left out. So anybody who's ever taken anything thinks they've had the psychedelic experience and feels fully qualified to hold an opinion on it, when in fact, it's pretty elusive, the real thing. You have to take a heroic dose under the right conditions to really smash through. I mean, yes, there are all kinds of approaches to it. Insight into childhood trauma, recovery of lost memories, opening to your emotional side, insights into the dynamics of the life and people around, all of it. But that is not anywhere near the bullseye. That's just dancing around the rim of it. So we have to, as a community, try and build consensus about what happens at the real center. What's happening at the center of the mandala? What kind of a modality can we describe and create a shared map of that we can come back to the rest of the folks and talk about? And then the other thing is, well, I'm just banking on curiosity to do a lot of the footwork for the revolution. This is too good to miss. It's like placing sex off limits or something and then expecting people not to find out about it. Now that Marxism has collapsed, if we don't substitute something for consumer values, then we're just going to rape the earth in an effort to create crap for everybody. Well, the only counterpoise to consumer values, to materialism, is spiritualism. And I don't mean some bloodless, carol-singing kind of namby-pamby abstraction. I mean there has to be as much inner richness as there previously was outer richness. And this is why, to the alarm of some people, I've been fairly interested in virtual realities. Because I think, if everybody wants to live in Versailles, the only way you're going to be able to do that is if you make Versailles a disc for $3.95 that they can plug in and then go live in it. So we can't preach to the have-nots the virtue of voluntary simplicity when we're riding around in BMWs and collecting Monets. That doesn't make a lot of sense. So building a core consensus, this is still in answer to your question, what can we do? And then replicating the meme. And I introduce this concept in each of my workshops because I think it makes it easier for you to understand what's happening here. A meme is the smallest unit of an idea. It's like a gene is to proteins. Proteins are made by genes, and genes code for proteins. Okay, well, ideas are made out of memes. And you link a few memes together, and you have an idea. Memes, like genes, can be replicated. You replicate them by either telling the meme to many people or telling a lot of people all at once. And then these people you've told, they become potential replicators of the meme. And there is a domain of culture that is like an environment of competing ideas. And the memes go off and live in this ideological environment. And some flourish, and some are consumed by others, and some are incorporated into others. And the idea is to keep the psychedelic meme alive, and to make it grow, and to allow its claim to be heard. It's not in danger of dying. It's a very persistent meme. It's been around for about 20,000 years, and it's been highly repressed in many cultures for the last couple of thousand years. Yet we're trying to rebirth it. So thinking about it that way, thinking of yourself as a replicator of this thing which wishes to move through society, gives a mechanical model for understanding what is really ideological war, a war about the definition of human nature. That's what's at stake. What shall we become? What can we become? There's no question that we need a greater consciousness of who we are. And if psychedelic drugs are to be taken seriously at all as consciousness expanding agents, then they have to be given their due place in the great dialogue that's taking place about the future, creating it, and then realizing it, the future of the species.
I'm wanting to say something further about the book of Genesis and the notion of getting to the center. There are two cherubims guarding the gate with the flaming swords, and that they represent a pair of opposites, fear and desire, and that part of the problem of getting a bite of that tree of immortal life is getting to the realm beyond pair of opposites, beyond fear and desire. And the other related thing is that the question of why this world is not one of just a homogeneous perfection, and instead a world of multiplicity of forms and conflicts. And it's from a drop of ignorance that spills into undifferentiated perfection. And from that one drop of ignorance proceeds the multiplicity of the world we experience.
This is a Gnostic idea, the drop of ink in the pure glass of water. Yeah, well, Gnosticism was the idea. I mean, it had many forms, but the basic idea was that light had been scattered through the universe, and that the task of salvation was to gather this light together and to somehow transmit it back to its source in some higher dimension, which is a pretty good metaphor. One of the issues that comes up in these workshops inevitably, and I confess I don't have a real answer for this, is, are we a part of nature and the stewards of nature, or are we out of nature? Are we of another ontos and sculpted for a different destiny? It's very clear that the life of the planet and our success as a conscious species, these two things have to either be split away from each other, or one is going to be the undoing of the other. And this is a real problem. This problem haunts Western thinking. It's nothing new. Is nature God, or is nature the devil? I mean, that's the harshest statement of this problem.
One of the ways of detecting, breast cancer is with thermography, where they look for a hot spot on the breast, and that's a suspicious area. And I think when I'm up in an airplane at night and look down on Gaia, think of this as an organism, a giant organism, and say, gee, there's a cancer down there. It's hot. You can see it. It's glowing. And you go down there, and what you find is, if you look upon us as sort of the cells which have gone awry, and the way in which we've got awry is the nature of our consciousness, in that it's focused in terms of time and space and causality. And then the thumb, the prehensile, the ability to do something about it, because I don't know for sure, but I imagine that the dolphins could have their consciousness with a sense of time, and they might have some of the same time, space, causality understanding of the physical world that we do, but they lack the ability to do anything about it.
To project force into the world.
So that given those two qualities, this quality of our minds to look upon the world through, in this way, time, space, and causality, and that thumb, we have become the cancer on the organism of the earth.
Well, see,
it's quite a negative thought.
It is negative, and I'm not sure that I buy into it, and I'm not sure that I don't buy into it either. This is the question. Is the evolution of historical society and science and all the ugly adumbrations of that, sexism, fascism, racism, is that part of the process? Or is it a breaking away? Is there some good in it? Was history for something, or would we have just been better off without it? And I don't know. Sometimes I mean, I think of Western civilization as the prodigal son. We went forth, we left our father's house, which was the archaic style of existence. We left our father's house and we wandered into matter and cut deals with demonic forces, and millennia have passed, and now the earth is polluted, and we are back at the longhouse, saying to these people, do you have any wisdom that can save us from our fate? Well, they do, to a degree. I mean, they have this deep insight into natural dynamics and curing, and maybe more. I mean, maybe there is magic in this world. But we know some things too. And we can summon the energy of the stars, if necessary, down to the deserts of this planet, or to the cities of our enemies, if necessary. And this is no small accomplishment on any scale. This is quite impressive. I mean, my God, that cytoplasm could create a strategy for triggering fusion. It's amazing. So I would like to think that this peregrination into matter went for something, that these are skills that we may need out in the universe when we really get our wings and take off. And that this deep involvement with matter, it was a kind of an addiction. And if we can pull out of it, a great deal has been learned. I mean, after all, if people had stayed in the rainforests, then we would have been ineluctably linked to the destiny of this planet as an animal species. And what if this is the only intelligence in the universe? Then I would think we have a certain obligation to preserve it past the life of the existence of the solar system. So if we're not willing to commit ourselves at any phase of our evolution to a technical phase that involves mastery over matter, then we have no more defense against the larger universe than raccoons and katydids if push comes to shove. I don't know. I mean, I stress that there's no easy resolution on this. It haunts all thinking about conservation. I mean, I thought throughout the 80s, why aren't the conservationist space colony enthusiasts? Why don't the Save the World people support the high-tech solutions that would move industry off the planet? Why are these various factions unable to make common cause behind a very large vision? And I don't know, but I think as pressure mounts for solutions, this will have to be done. I mean, I would like to live in a world where the entire Earth was a bioreserve. I would like to live in a situation where the idea that there would be heavy industry inside the bioreserve would be thought an abomination. All that stuff can be done on the moon or in the asteroid belts. It's as inappropriate as having a nuclear power plant in the middle of a rainforest to have heavy industry on the surface of the Earth. We need to think on very large time scales, and we need to figure out how to create political machinery to do that. We've been living a potlatch existence, just a frenzied, consumerist kind of unthinking abuse. And I think the best inoculation for that style of life is a stiff dose of psychedelics. You can't evade it. It dissolves boundaries. It allows you to feel what you're doing. I mean, the level of denial in this society is incredible. God, we don't feel it. We read the newspaper, but we don't feel what it's telling us, because if we felt it, we would probably be an emotional wreck. But there's something to be said for opening up to some of that. There's a notion in therapy that if you want the client to actually make progress, you raise the alarm level. Guy comes to you for therapy, you say to him, you think you've got problems? You have no idea what problems you have. And then work from there. So it's very serious business. It's trying to steer a society back toward a faith that was lost. And God is like a lost continent in the human mind. And it's the only continent where there is safe harbor in the present historical situation.